Hello, this is Joe Trahan, welcoming you to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, whose mission is to enlighten the world to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances. As the national leader on this subject, they communicate their educational messages through various methods, including this podcast. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Hi, this is Don Hooten, Executive Chairman and Founder of the Taylor Hooten Foundation. It's my pleasure today to host this podcast and to talk about one of the, and probably the most significant events that's happened in the history of the Taylor Hooten Foundation, a real watershed event that occurred back in 2005 when the House Reform Committee hosted the hearings on steroids in baseball. It was during those hearings that many of you may recall that Marco McGuire and Jose Canseco and Rafael Palmeiro, a number of high-profile baseball players, and some of the management of baseball, including Commissioner Selig, were called before the Congress to address the concern of performance-enhancing drugs and the most prolific sport in the U.S., baseball. I was invited to testify along with the family of Rob Garibaldi to talk about the effect that those drugs were having on the children in the U.S. at the time, and in fact still are having today. Those were the most watched hearings in the history of the Congress. They went on for 11 or 12 hours and were riveting, with literally tens of millions of people tuning in to see the stars and hear about this very controversial problem. The chairman of those hearings that day was Tom Davis, congressman from the great state of Virginia, who gavelled the hearings to order and maintained order throughout the hearings that day. And it's my pleasure today, as part of our series reminiscing about those hearings 15 years later, that Congressman Tom Davis has joined us today to talk about those hearings and the impact that they've had not only on baseball, but on the U.S. And now I would like to turn it over to Tom Davis to talk about those hearings. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really glad to be joined today by former Congressman Tom Davis from Virginia. First time I got to meet Congressman Davis was back in 2005 during the infamous congressional hearings on steroids in baseball. Was an unbelievable all-day experience, and from talking to the congressional staffers after those hearings, they told me that these were the most watched hearings in the history of the Congress. Just kind of put a spotlight on the amount of attention that was being paid to this subject during those days. So let me begin by introducing Congressman Davis. Welcome to our podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
For getting prepared for this discussion with you, Tom, I see that you've been in politics for a long time. Before we get to talking about those hearings, I'd love to hear a little bit more about you. How did you get into politics?
You know what? It was my grandfather had been involved in Nebraska politics, and I got an appointment as a page for the two Nebraska senators back in 1963, and I was a Senate page for my 4 years of high school, where I'd go to school at 6 in the morning until 10. I was on the floor of the Senate when they passed the Civil Rights Bill, the Voting Rights Act, a number of things during that time, and it just whetted my appetite. Got a full scholarship to Amherst, a small college in Massachusetts, but one of my classmates there was David Eisenhower, who happened to be Nixon's son-in-law. Parlayed that into a job at the White House afterwards, and then after service in the Army, came back, went to law school at the University of Virginia, and came back and ran for office at the age of 29, ran for the county board in Fairfax, and that was the start of a winning streak. I never lost an election, and I was a Republican. I never had a Republican district to run in. I had to knock off incumbents every step of the way, but I really loved it. I studied it. I read the footnotes on it. I tell people, it wasn't work for me. People say, man, you're just working so hard. It wasn't work. I loved it. And so it was just the kind of what I was meant to do. And so I kept going up from chairman of the county board, from the county board to chairman of the county board, which is our equivalent of mayor in a county of over 1 million people. and then to Congress for 7 terms. And then at the age of 59, I started to say to myself, do I really want to spend the rest of my life here? One of the members died, and they flew the flag over the Capitol at half-mast, and at the funeral, everybody's jockeying for her seat in Congress, and people coming up. And I just said, I don't think that's the way I want to go out of here. and I had a few years left that I could make money. I suffered from a disease called maltuition, which means you've got to pay your kids' college expenses. And so I just, for a lot of practical reasons, decided it was time to go off. I'd taken my best earning years and put them in politics, and if you do it honestly, you don't make any money. Thought maybe it was time to do something else, and so then I went with Deloitte for 10 years, and now I'm with Holland Knight Law Firm, and I'm the rector at George Mason University, where we, by the way, have a strong baseball program. But I'm the chairman of the board there, and that's kind of my public service. I teach there as well.
Oh, well, very good. I learned some stuff during that discussion. It's not all included in Wikipedia, which is.
No, well, they got the fact that my wife was a state senator too, so we were pretty political, and that was kind of our lives. And when she lost her Senate seat after 10 years, I just said, Jimmy, let's just have a life together.
Yeah, I would imagine anytime you're representing folks like you have, that will all consuming of your time and energies. What I'd like to move on to now is the time that you spent in the Congress as the chairman of the Government Reform Committee. And could you tell us a little bit about, what that committee is, what it does? How did you wind up leading that important work?
So when I got elected to Congress, I'm a freshman. I was one of the premier races early on. Nobody anticipated a Republican landslide when I got elected in '94 and knocking off an incumbent. And there was a lot of jockeying for the key seats, which are appropriations and Ways and Means. But they had shrunk a committee called the District of Columbia Committee and had moved it into another committee called the Government Reform Committee. Government reform had responsibility for government contracting, civil service, and District of Columbia, which in my district outside of Washington, that was like a super committee. I won on there and I got named the chairman of the District of Columbia subcommittee and was able to use that to write the control board bill for the city and a lot of other things. I got the city out from under a $5 billion debt they'd inherited at the time of Home Rule, wrote a DC voucher bill, a college access bill for students. And it worked for me because all of my district was Fairfax. Helping D.C. was helpful for my local newspaper, the Washington Post, which was a pretty democratic paper, but they endorsed me every time. So the politics worked pretty well. I had a lot of government contractors in my district and a lot of civil servants. So the committee really put me in a position to be helpful to my constituents. A couple terms in, I ran for chairman of the Republican Campaign Committee. I was a political junkie. At the Nixon White House, I'd worked for Harry Dent, who was the author of the Southern Strategy for the Republican Party. Learned a lot, wrote my honors thesis at Amherst on political realignment in the Outer South, post-Voting Rights Act. And, I had memorized every member of Congress in the 8th grade. And that impressed my Nebraska senators to the point they appointed me as a page. And I just kept that kind of base knowledge. It's like knowing all the baseball players. And so campaign committee was great. And I had 2 successful runs at it where I exceeded expectations and increased the Republican majority. And then I ran for chairman of the committee. I had 8 people ahead of me in seniority. I had people that were far more conservative and I think party line voters than me, but having been chairman of the campaign committee, they couldn't stop me. And so that's how I became chairman of the Government Reform Committee. And it was, as I said, it was a committee. I never missed a meeting. I'd paid attention to it. Some of these other members weren't quite as active on the committee that had seniority, and I was able to take it to a vote of the steering committee and win the chairmanship.
So what jurisdiction does that committee have over an entity like Major League Baseball? And how did you guys, I'm sure you were the key driver there, but how did you wind up with so much interest or attention being paid to Major League Baseball back in 2005? So
that's a really good question. So when I became chairman of the committee, this had been a very partisan committee. First thing I did is walked over to my ranking Democrat on the committee, Henry Waxman, and said, Henry, I'd like to run this committee with you. I want you to feel a co-partner with me when you have, give me your priorities. Let me see what I can improve them. And of course, his first priority was like, we're going to hold hearings on the illegal war and we want to impeach Bush and all this. But you get down to about, the obligatory things the minority party does. But when we got down, one of them was they were really concerned about steroids in baseball. I said, well, let's explore this. This looks like something we can work together. One of his aides, Phil Shalero, had been very active in this, and Henry had made his reputation on the Energy and Commerce Committee on healthcare issues And he was very concerned about this. And so we talked about it and decided this was something we might want to hold a hearing on. Now, the Government Reform Committee doesn't have any jurisdiction per se on that issue, but we have broad oversight over anything in government or out of government. We're the only committee that has that broad oversight. The committee was created because in the past, you have your Armed Services Committee became very close to the Pentagon. Your Agricultural Committee became close to the Agriculture Department, et cetera. Your Banking Committee was close to the bankers and the financial services industry. So our committee was created so that you'd have somebody that could come in and be able to tackle the tough issues that maybe the committees of jurisdiction didn't want to do. So when they tried a mad cow disease cover-up, we held hearings on it. And we could have an honest dialogue about it. We didn't worry about ticking off the Ag Department. So that's why the committee was created. And we had jurisdiction on things like government contracting and the post office and issues like that, but not the sexy issues. But steroids was something we thought, we ought to shine a light on this. This has gotten really out of hand. And we looked at what was happening to kids' health, that this was becoming an epidemic among high schoolers, and there was simply no regulation on this, and they were taking their cues from the big guys. And Major League Baseball had turned a jaundiced eye to it. So we called Major League Baseball and said we're thinking of holding a hearing, and they didn't. The commissioner didn't respond. The vice commissioner didn't respond. They just sent their lobbyists in, and they kind of poo-pooed it, like, why are we getting in the way? And Henry and I looked at each other and said, they aren't taking this seriously. And so we decided to go ahead and hold a hearing. At that point, we had owners. I'll never forget Angelos, the owner of the Orioles, who was very close to the unions, came in to have a meeting with Waxman, who was a union, he's a very pro-union member. And Henry invited me to the meeting, and at one point, Angelo says, this is going to hurt the union. And Waxman said, well, then the union deserves to be hurt. And I just said, Henry, I'm really proud of you. So we stood together on this. We took a lot of heat from other members, or why are you doing this? But it brought us together in a way that nothing else did, and kept our committee together on one issue, focused on this. It wasn't a partisan issue. And it really, this did more than anything else, I think, to make it a very operable committee on other issues, because we worked so closely on this. And that's how it happened. And we worked together every step of the way.
Were you surprised at the level of public attention and media attention that those hearings garnered?
I was. Look, I came up through the rough and tumble world of, Northern Virginia politics and D.C. with the Washington Post, where, if you sneeze wrong, you get a bad article. But I wasn't prepared to how vicious reporting could be till I got into the sports reporting. That is even nastier. I just went ahead. My staff kept a lot of the stuff away from me so that it wouldn't bother me. And we just plugged ahead and saw that we had a job to do, and we worked together to get the job done. We kept our eye on the ball. One of the things that people don't understand is we subpoenaed these baseball players, and I'll never forget Palmer said, well, that's my birthday. I don't think I can make it. To perfect a subpoena in Congress is a very difficult thing to do. You got to take it to the House floor for a vote. And Henry and I weren't sure if we had the votes or not. We hadn't done a vote count. It was bipartisan. You had two leaders for it, but Major League Baseball and its allies could bring a lot of pressure down if we took this to a House vote. We went on Meet the Press and was asked, what if they didn't show? And I said, well, we'll hold them in contempt. That's what we'll do. We'll do a contempt citation. And Henry says, I hope it doesn't come to that. And eventually, of course, the players all showed. But it was very dicey, and we had some members said some pretty unkind things about us, and a lot of the sports writers, they were just eating us up. Anybody who'd taken free baseball tickets from Major League Baseball, they called in the chits on them, and then we got a bad article.
What were your, that was my third time testifying up there, but first time in an environment like that, Congressman. What are your clearest memories about that? What was it, 11 or 12-hour day?
Well, it was, and of course, what made this different from your other hearings is you had Major League Baseball players there. They don't usually fit on Capitol Hill, and some people get in awe of politicians, but politicians get in awe of Hollywood celebrities and sports celebrities. And so this was something that just, you had it all combined in one room. You had these stars up there. I had taken Jose Canseco to dinner before we went ahead with the hearing to just hear his story. And he made I think a point that just stuck out to me. When the owners were saying they didn't know this was going on, he said, look, he said, they were paying me, $7 million or something. He said, don't you think they didn't know everything about me? They're investing in one person, my performance on the field. I had physicals. They knew who I was sleeping with, what my private life was like. These investments, of course they knew. And so that just stood out to me like, that makes a lot of sense. And if we're going to do anything, it's going to have to come from here, because neither the players nor the owners wanted to use a chit in their collective bargaining to change it. And so we had to do that. And as you know, Don, you were our leadoff witness. And then we had Jim Bunning come in, who was a U.S. Senator and a Hall of Famer, come in, and that kind of added to the whole aura of what we were trying to do.
Do you feel that your work in this area had an impact on baseball?
I don't think there's any question about it. That baseball was not going to change without some kind of pressure. They were the balls were flying out of the park. Records were being broken. Why in the world would they're making a lot of money? Why would they change it? And why would they go to a collective bargaining agreement and give up something to change it that is going to cost them money? So no, we were in one of these catch-22s where everybody kind of knew it was wrong. There was no effort to really to change it.
So I guess from the chair that you were sitting in at the time, you got your desired results. I mean, baseball now has the toughest steroid or just performance-enhancing drug testing program in all of sports, and right. I would imagine that we could trace many of the roots of that effort back to those hearings that day, don't you?
Well, I think you can trace all the roots to it. And we did one other thing. Is when it was over, Henry called Selig in, Henry and me. At this point, Henry was trying. He said, "Look," he said, "we don't want to do a witch hunt on this thing, but I think we need to get a record of what happened during this period of time and document it." So they hired former Senator Mitchell from Maine, a widely respected majority leader of the Senate, to do an investigation. He didn't have subpoena power, but he did a thorough investigation and found, I think, 70 some other players that had used it and kind of documented what had happened. And out of that, of course, came Roger Clemens, who denied the whole thing and ended up coming to the committee and saying one thing when the evidence showed another way and having to go to court twice to get acquitted. But we wanted to build a record that this wasn't indeed a one-off. This is the way baseball had functioned for some time, and for historical purposes thought it ought to be documented.
Yes, I got to sit down with Senator Mitchell, quite an impressive guy, and as you say, I think did as thorough a job as could be done to dig to the bottom of this and, like you say, document what was going on and make recommendations back to government and to baseball, to Mr. Selig, about what needed to be done in this area. And wow, have things changed in the ensuing years, at least in baseball, which, kind of brings me to a larger subject. The great news is that baseball stepped up and has made some fundamental changes. The bad news is this usage of these drugs amongst the kids has continued to grow and has permeated, virtually every high school in America. And I can almost say that literally, but certainly figuratively. The thing has changed, though, Congressman. And today, experts tell us about 80% of the users aren't in sports at all. They've gone to the kids are using this stuff to look better, which is really scary. With your old congressman's hat on, what can or should the federal government or we as citizens be doing to attack just one more of the large number of drug epidemics that are going on in this country? What can we do?
Well, right now it's being settled in courtrooms as people are suing some of the drug manufacturers who just manufacture the drug. They don't write the prescriptions. But I think Congress needs to shed a light on that at this point. You can beef up investigations. They have the ability to do that, although most of this is done through the state law. You can beef up the laws on this kind of thing. But the main thing they need to do is be instructive to kids and just get out there and walk about how harmful this is. Look at vaping is another thing that's occurred. Look, I'm old school. I don't understand why you've got on the one hand, you've got an opioid epidemic. Now you're telling me steroids there. We know vaping is at issue. And the answer to that is we're going to legalize marijuana. But there's just a lot of contradictions in public policy in these areas. The way you do it is you just shed a light on it and you get the public attention on it, and sooner or later these things, the public opinion will govern. This is dangerous for kids, and it doesn't always help them look good. And if you look good, it has other long-term psychological and physical problems. So educating kids to this is very, very important.
Well, and that's what our organization does. We sure could use, and I mean this in the most sincere way I can say it, is I wish we could find another leader or catalyst like you and Congressman Waxman were to kind of float this issue back up, for some help in dealing with it. It's really gotten, that part of the problem hasn't gotten any better. It's gotten worse for different reasons, but it's gotten worse.
Well,
one of the areas that I'd love your comment on is the availability not just of performance-enhancing drugs, but of all drugs on the internet. Can take you to sites today and where kids can order and get drugs delivered to them at their home in a plain brown envelope without the knowledge of their parents or anybody else. Where do we go to deal with an insidious problem like that?
Well, the internet, as you know, is one of the, it's a wonderful structure in so many ways. I always liken it to the way that Rome built all these roads leading out into the far reaches of the empire, and the Romans built these roads and allowed them to conquer, but those same roads were used by the barbarians to come in and recapture it. We've got the same issues here. It's got some wonderful things to it in terms of access to people who didn't have it before, freedoms we didn't have before, to knowledge and the like. But it's also being abused. We see this in the political structure as well, where over the internet, what we call the crap to content ratio of information coming over the internet is now not vetted. It's not necessarily factual. People are tuning into what they want to hear, and it's created, just bubbles of people who don't tune in for information, but for affirmation. And as a society, we're learning to cope with the capabilities that the internet has given us. And this is another area where access is going to be hard to control on the internet in terms of deliverables and the like. At least at a store, you could ask somebody for an ID or something. It's much harder to do that on the internet, although I suspect over time we'll come to grips with a way to do that.
Well, and of course, we've got the civil libertarians that will resist a lot of the controls that of the sort that I've at least got in my mind's eye, and I'm sure you do too, that are going to resist it at all costs.
Right. That's right. I think we're, you're right, that you find that in anything. There is inertia in anything you try to do. And so it just takes some leadership to come out and take control of the issue. Look, all Henry and I did was hold the hearings. After that, the sports writers took over. Initially, we were criticized until we started to subpoena some documents. And baseball said they had set up this policy on steroids and they had protocols, and it turned out that they weren't even in writing. And all of a sudden, the tide started to turn on the issue. And the hearings, I think, was the culmination. And then, of course, the fact that Palmero was found to tested positive, all of that added to it. So we moved through, and people decided this was a bad idea in Major League. All of a sudden, other committees started getting into the action, threatening Major League with its antitrust exemption, and Major League Baseball and the Players Association came together and fixed it.
Yeah, you're really bringing back some memories. There was just a crescendo of activity that happened over a 12 or 24 month period that really moved the nation on this topic. And I want to personally thank you for being a leader in this area. That, our family was certainly affected by this one, and this is one of the very positive and fond memories of progress that has been made on this topic over our journey on this effort.
Well, Don, let me say to you, you took a tragedy, a family tragedy, and you turned it into something positive. You come off it. That's very difficult to do. A lot of people, they get down on this stuff. They hide, they run away, they curl up. It's the easy thing to do in your grief. But you took the bull by the horns. You set up this foundation, and you're out there every day fighting this epidemic. And you've saved lives. It's been no question. It's been a net plus along the way. It takes a lot of courage and a lot of persistence to make something like that a success, and you've been able to do that.
I appreciate those comments. It's, a family of faith and believe that genuinely the good Lord put some obstacles in your life, or tragedy in this case, that causes you to take your life experience and direction and turn it 180 degrees. And hopefully we've been able to take Taylor's memory and continue the impact that you and Congressman Waxman and the committee began back in 2005.
I do that. Once a year you're at the Nats game, so with some of the kids that have been helped through this, and it's really rewarding to see that.
Well, thank you very much. Listen, as we wrap up here, is there anything we've missed? Any other comments that you would like to make, or memories that you would like to share before we wrap this up?
Yeah, let me give you a couple insights from those hearings. First of all, as I said, I took Conseco out to dinner, and that was he ate a lot, but he was bulking up. It was interesting. We couldn't get, he and Palmero had grown up together. They were both Cuban, of Cuban heritage, grew up in the same neighborhoods, had known each other. We couldn't get them in the same room. We couldn't put them in the same holding room. We had to put them in different rooms. This steroid thing had so divided them. I spent the evening with Mark McGuire, who wanted to tell the whole story, but he had a statute of limitations of 5 years, and he'd been out for 4 years. He couldn't testify without getting some immunity from prosecution, and I went to the Attorney General to ask for transactional immunity, and the Attorney General, Alberto Gonzalez, wouldn't give it to me. And I to this day, said, why can't you do this? You've got nothing going here. This will help both. And I just, to this day, feel he was not a good. I had one other issue with him, and he showed no leadership over there at a time where he could have really made what were blockbuster hearings. He could have made them even more impacted. McGuire got up and told the story that he wanted to tell. I think Mark went back to redeem himself in a lot of ways. He said it was wrong. He's back in baseball today. This is a chapter in his life that may have kept him out of the hall. Our goal was not to hurt anybody. It was just to change the game. We could have continued to hold hearings and put people under oath and held an inquisition. That wasn't our purpose. Our purpose was to change the game. I think we ended up doing that. And was there some collateral damage along the way? I think there was. But anyway, that was some of the preparation we did for this hearing. And as you said, they were blockbuster hearings.
It was surreal that day. Memories, as I got there early for the hearings, and all of the chairs in the hearings, except for the ones where witnesses like us were seated in those reserved seats. Other than that, I think every chair had the name of a different newspaper or radio or TV outlet from around the United States, around the world, that were reserved for reporters. And then there was just a sea of reporters that were out in the hallway. It was, for a good old Southern boy like me, it was just overwhelming in a good way, because we got a level of attention that we've not been able to muster since. But wow, what a day.
Well, the best part of the day, when you think back, was everybody had to listen to you leading it off. So we had the commissioner of baseball, we had these players listening to you tell your story. And I think that made an impact on them, that maybe what they were doing wasn't just selfish in terms of getting themselves ahead, but it was having an effect on other people. And that was the purpose of this, but you laid a really strong predicate for why we were doing this. This was a public health issue. This wasn't just an issue of us interfering with baseball.
Yeah, and I think, because I've had a chance to talk to Mark McGuire and a couple of these other guys, I honestly believe that it wasn't until that morning, as you said, the players were in an ante room just off the hearing room, and they were watching, the testimony on TV before they came in there. And I'm convinced, and I know a couple of the news reporters have commented that, I know Mark got emotional during his testimony, and I'm not sure that he or some of the other players ever had connected the dots between, what they had been doing, the Bash brothers, and all of the home run activity and the rumors, which became more than rumors, about the steroid use. I'm not sure some of those guys, if any of the guys, had ever put those two together and realized they were role models and they were setting some awful poor examples for our young people.
I agree. And as I said, we changed the game. I didn't do it. Waxman didn't do it. You were a major part of that. It was a team effort. But those hearings basically were the start of something that has changed the game forever.
Well, Congressman, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate you taking your time. It's always a pleasure getting to visit with you, and especially to reminisce about that big day on Capitol Hill.
Well, thank you, and I'll see you if you come to Washington again this summer. Get out for a game. I just add, I still do batting practice with the Nationals single A team. It's moved down to Fredericksburg, and I do batting practice once a year, and I've never gotten one out. If you put them on the morning track, and as I say, I may be 71 years old now, but I hit like a 68-year-old, so they still let me out there.
I like that. I like that. Well, you have a good rest of your day. I look forward to running into you down the road, and maybe we can do this again sometime.
Don, thanks, and thanks for everything you're doing.
Well, that's it for today's show. Thanks for listening to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, a nonprofit organization leading a national campaign to enlighten people to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances and inspiring people to live and compete without the use of these substances. Please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and tune in to our next episode.